Hi, everyone. We wanted to give you a quick content and trigger warning. This episode of Lovecraft Country Bumpkin discusses topics related to violence and gore.
Welcome to Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, LaTara,
Tori,
and Klara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
In this week's episode, the season finale of Lovecraft Country, multiple plot lines converge to meet at a final showdown. With help from the Freeman ancestors, Gia, and even the Black Shoggoth, our heroes journey back to Artem to confront Christina's immortality spell. However, as can happen with even the best laid plans, things go lethally awry, and some of our heroes don't make it out alive.
Y'all, we made it to the end of season 1.
We somehow did.
This doesn't feel like it's been 10 episodes. This feels like it's been a lifetime.
Yeah, I feel like I've aged 20 years over just the 10 hours of watching TV.
Man.
But in a good way.
Yeah. This is the kind of show that, like, it stays with you. You know what I mean? I catch myself, like, thinking about it, not just because of our podcast, but, like, just because something wow happens. I'm just like, what just occurred?
I'll think about this for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be another episode to think about for the rest of the week. I'm glad that glad's not the right word. I'm whatever a cognate for glad is that isn't glad that it's a 10 episode season, because I feel like every episode is basically movie length and also movie in quality, and so I think kind of like the shortened season that isn't a typical 22 season episode season I think allows for like a lot of reprieve and for them to do a lot with a shorter amount of time.
I mean, horror is kind of hard to sustain, like as watchers, as like writers. I think that this was like, it was balanced, I think, to have a 10 episode season.
I agree.
And it allowed them to like delve into different like genres and tropes of horror, as well as like horror adjacent, like a futuristic episodes or adventure genres. Which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed that. I didn't expect that. I was expecting them to stick pretty closely to horror. So to have them to go off into different adventure, sci-fi, fantasy, I really enjoyed that sort of additional material in the show for sure.
Well, I think we have a ton of ground to cover. Many things happened this time. So why don't we just go ahead and dive in to our Bummy Awards, which is what we give to our most outstanding moments, characters, themes from the show every week. So for the first Bummy Award, who won this week's finale episode for you?
I just have to say this like final closing scene, D with this arm. Like, I am so here for Cyborg D with like the Black Shoggoth who's like her running like sidekick and protector. And I like everything about that was like, because I was so sad like earlier in the episode when they removed the spell from D, but then like they showed that like her arm had still been like, well, like, I don't know, mummified or desiccated or something like that. But she could not use her arm anymore. And I remember wondering if she was left-handed or right-handed in terms of like her drawing, but regardless, I was sad for her, like when she talked about like not being able to draw anymore with her mom. And then when they unveiled this cyborg arm that she used to kill Christina, I was just like, everything about this is quite satisfying and exciting. And I don't know, like to have like a genius universe traveling mother who like brings back cyborg technology just in the 50s was, it was an unexpected twist for me, but I was not mad at it. I thought it was pretty cool.
It just looked so cool, and like when she like takes off her jacket partially to like reveal it to the camera to us, like she's not revealing it to anyone. I guess Christina maybe, but like for revealing it for the camera, I think it was just the whole like shot for that reveal. She's like like kind of like standing on the hill. There's the moon.
Yeah.
And she looks like a warrior woman with her cyborg arm. So cool. I think that shot alone was like just fantastic.
Yeah, it was this incredible moment where like the horror, because like the shoggoth is still like a monster, right? And like it low key kind of howled or like roared at the moon, like a bit like a werewolf.
Werewolf energy, definitely.
Huge werewolf energy, and like these like ruins, right? And like then she has this robotic arm, and it's like so this layering of like horror and sci-fi of old and new and past and future, like it was definitely absolutely an incredible moment visually and conceptually.
I agree. And I think too that moment of like generational power was interesting. I mean, as it was happening, I was like kind of upset because I don't want Dee to be a murderer. But I understand like the impetus there. She was saying they never learn. She was like the next generation, she is more radical than her predecessors. Like even the ones who liberated, they liberated people of color around the world from the possibility of oppression by magic from white people. Still, Dee is like more radical than that. So it's, I still feel a little oogie about it. Honestly, I'm not thrilled at her murdering folks. But I see like where the strength of that moment comes from, and like the hope in that promise, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of like the effects of like demurdering someone, even though like I do not feel bad for Christina at all in any way, shape, or form, but I did wonder like when they were leading up to that scene and like Dee. And I'm just gonna keep calling him Black Shoggoth because I don't know his name.
I don't think he has a name yet.
Should we name him?
Okay.
No.
No.
If you name it, then you got to keep it.
I mean, basically, right? And we're finally going to make this happen because I still definitely want my own Black Shoggoth. But yes, but when they were standing there, I kind of felt, and I think there are moments in Lovecraft where they purposely build up to something that is coming, and so I kind of felt like this would be Christina's end. But I wasn't sure if Dee would do it or if she would have the Black Shoggoth do it. Like when it showed up to roar, and then when she like took out her arm, and I was like, "Oh, robot!" And then like the arm was like choking Christina, and I was like, "Oh, Dee is murdering somebody," which I firmly believe Christina deserved. But I do wonder about it's like this a quote I heard in an anime I watched once, but that like when which I mean, let's be real, I get a lot of my life advice from anime. But this one character, she said something, and I've always remembered this line, and I first watched this anime when I was like 20 or something. It's been years. But she was like, to take a life is a heavy thing. And for the person to do it, they must carry that burden with them forever. And so I say all of that to say my hope is that in doing this, that Dee that this does not become a burden that she carries, that it's not like I will be interested to see her character development, should they have a second season, in terms of like, does she wrestle with like feelings of guilt or like worry or morality or not, which I would also be down for her to just be perfectly okay with this and be like, this was a decision I made in the moment and it felt like justice and that was what I did. But I will be interested to see if they come back to that decision.
Yeah, I think it like begs the question, like, why Dee? Like, why did Dee have to?
Yeah.
In terms of the writing, why was Dee the one who
That's a good question.
ultimately kills Christina? And why does it happen at the very end of the episode, or the very end of this first season? And I think like one of the interesting things about the ending finale was for them to end on this note, which is uneasy and very complex, has good and bad feelings associated with it. What that means for the kind of, I guess, like for lack of a better word, like ethos of the show that they're trying to cultivate, and what this would mean for future seasons as well.
I think these are really great questions, Klara. I agree.
Y'all are gonna laugh at me. The Thing won the award for this episode for me was the Black Shoggoth.
Yes.
We got her!
No!
It was a process.
It was I still hate it. I still think they're disgusting.
It was not love at first sight, but you got there.
It's kind of cute, right?
Like, it was kind of cute.
In like a murder kind of way.
Yeah. A little murder.
A little murder, a little gross, a little too many eyes on its back. But it was like a little puppy dog for Dee, which was really cute.
I loved it. I love it.
Dee is so kick butt that it's an appropriate pet for her.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, come on, she's not gonna have like a basic dog or something. Like, no,
please.
She needs to have a shoggoth. But even like when we're flashing back, like, through Gia, I guess like perspective, like going into the memories of Atticus, like when we see that like Atticus is showing Dee the shoggoth, like that was a puppy. That was a snout that was like being pet for the first time.
Yep.
But yeah, so it was like exponentially cuter the very last episode of the season.
This shoggoth, he just acts more like a pet, like kind of like he acts more like a guard dog than like I don't know, like a crazy psycho killer monster stalking the forest. Like, which I know technically the other shoggoths were also like guards.
Like, this one housebroken, yeah.
He is, and like he just seems more responsive, and like he actually has a relationship with both Tick and Dee. I still keep thinking about the scene where he was introduced, where he like took out all those cops, and then he like bounds over to Tick and like pauses so Tick could pet him. Like, I did a great job, right? And I'm like, yeah, you did, baby.
Good boy. Yeah. Okay, can we talk about how I called the shoggoth fight? Because I didn't call anything else, so I want this one to be attributed to me as deserved.
You definitely got that one for sure. I
was like kind of waiting for it. The episode, I was like, Tori's right. Like, they gotta have the fight.
They gotta, right? yeah. That was excellent.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess I've reluctantly come around to
welcome
to the shoggoth, the black shoggoth.
Welcome, girl.
Speaking of coming around, my episode winner today was another problematic figure from our podcast, which is Montrose Freeman. As you all know, we have been resisting liking Montrose. But I think here he had such an interesting role. Like, Tick's last words were for Montrose, not for Letty, not for George. Like, it felt like he'd said all he needed to say to Letty, but there was like so much left unsaid for Montrose. And it was really beautiful, I think, how he, despite his like fraught relationship with his father, he explicitly in the letter is saying, like, you have another chance. Like, I'm giving you another son. I acknowledge that you will be his grandfather. You'll be his family. Like, which to me seems like such a radical acceptance of Montrose that maybe Atticus wouldn't have been capable of even a couple episodes ago. So yeah, maybe the real winner of the episode was Montrose and Tick's relationship, but I felt like Montrose's fatherness really came through here, and it was so tragic and beautiful.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying sort of the evolution of their relationship over the past few episodes. Even like that push and pull of like, because Tick and Montrose had to deal with a lot of trauma and a lot of badness to get to a place where they could have a supportive and warm relationship. And I really didn't want to like Montrose, and I think I'm just going to stubbornly insist that I don't. But like, I like him more than I did before, if I'm honest. And I agree. Like in terms of like seeing their relationship change over the show, it's definitely been an evolution. I think that's an excellent word to use for them.
Well, should we move on then to our standout scene? Does anybody have a scene that stood out to you?
the shaboom scene.
Yes.
My bummy awards for this episode are a little silly, but not this one. First of all, I just love that song. It's just super catchy song by the Chords. It's just like a great moment. Like I think like a great uh uh a great song that kind of that encapsulates like a particular genre of the 1950s very, very well. The harmonies are fantastic. The kind of like the trajectory of the song is like high energy. It's really fun. But the scene was just really just like fun and peaceful, and like the entire if I think of it kind of as like a fulcrum for the entire episode, in which the rest of like the show kind of like pivots around it. The first half is like a lot of like drama and energy and anxiety and heartache, and the second half of the episode is also all the drama and anxiety and heartache. But this like little 5-ish minute scene where they sing the entirety of Shaboom over the radio, and it kind of like moves from the back of the car to the front of the car. Dee first starts singing, and then we eventually get to the women in the middle row who are singing along with it, and then Tick does the deep the deep harmony, which was so funny and so cute. Right? It was so cute. And then eventually Montrose, who is this entire time like a fuddy-duddy grumpy man, also sings this really silly like song, and everyone's just kind of like just like singing, and it's like I don't know, it was just a really fun I think a fun moment. I think it served an important function for the structure of the episode as well, like a before and an after. And also just kind of thinking of like, the characters at the time of the Shaboom car scene don't know that Ruby is Christina as Ruby, which is interesting. But like, even like
very chilling,
right? To think back on it this way. But even Ruby or Christina as Ruby has some kind of role in this particular scene, like is still like participating in some to some extent.
Yeah, when I think about her, like what she said to Letty, Christina as Ruby, like it was something like, I finally understand what family or something, or like
the appeal of family.
The appeal of family, yeah. And it's like I really hadn't thought about this until you just just mentioned the fact that she was included in this like fun sort of communal scene of singing and being silly, and it's like I wonder if Christina ever had that like in her actual life, like with like
you met her dad,
right? Like her crazy blonde father. I just probably not. And so she is like I was thinking of it as like a quippy line. From Christina, because she has those, but I wonder if it actually might have been a moment of a little bit of sincerity. Like this might have been her first time actually experiencing like a warm, supportive, familial kind of moment.
And I mean, it is her family. Like biologically, it's her family.
I keep forgetting that. Yeah.
Yeah, Tick's her cousin.
I will call him Cousin Tick every day. Just to make him mad. I don't know if I told y'all this. Like, if I were Christina, every time I saw him, I would be like, Cousin Tick. Like just to make his skin crawl. I feel like that would be
my skin's already crawling. I'm not even Tick.
That would make me so mad. And I feel like I would get so much like entertainment out of just being a brat. But like that's how I treat my real cousins. I'm bratty to them all the time, but I don't sacrifice them under a full moon though.
So you're already way up on the cousin scale from Christina.
Right? I'm so much better than her.
I'm glad our bars are so high.
Just gotta be not as trash as Christina Braithwaite. Oh, sorry, y'all.
I mean, while we're talking about Christina, maybe I should do my Bummy Award, which was my standout scene was the fight in the tower between Christina as Ruby and Letty. That I did not see that coming at all. It was really as upset as I am that Ruby is dead. It was masterful writing, I thought, because I've heard before that the best kind of plot twist is something that you don't see coming at all, but once it happens, you know it couldn't have happened any other way. And that's exactly how this felt. Like, with this spell that exists, like there's no other option, you know? And while I'm so heartbroken that Ruby's dead, but also really loved that moment where Christina reflects on it. It's such a brief moment, but she says to Letty, "It's your fault she's dead." You can like kind of sense the pain that she didn't want to kill Ruby, that she, in her twisted imagination, somehow it's Letty's fault that Ruby had to die. I thought that was such a rich moment. And honestly, I kind of think it could have been deeper than that. I wish we could have seen the altercation.
Yeah, I think like so we get an altercation between Ruby and Letty, right? Like, even if it is Christina and Ruby as Ruby, like this, like the entire season is kind of like fraught with like their sisterly tensions and like their angers toward each other, and they duke it out physically, or as it appears that they are duking it out, whatever, you know, kind of into complications of like what it means to be a person, how it means to be an individual. But like Christina and Ruby's relationship has been becoming increasingly complex towards the latter half of the season. There's a whole conversation between Christina and Ruby about Emmett Till's death, and you know, it's just kind of like they're different, like competing desires, and they're still being attracted to each other. This episode, we get to see Christina and Ruby as themselves kiss for the first time. When they have a car accident, and then Christina goes to really check on Ruby and see if she's okay. Like, there's like this like investment or proxy of care, at least, or a similar approximation of care and love. Maybe it is care and love that Ruby and Christina have, and that's kind of like glossed over. Like, the end of that relationship is kind of glossed over in a brief bit of dialogue on Christina as Ruby's part, on the part of Christina as Ruby, and it felt, I don't know, so much there, right? Then, you know, that entire relationship is a huge plot point.
Yeah. I know I said last episode that like I wanted some kind of resolution with their relationship, and I wanted them to kiss with themselves, and so I'm glad they did kiss with themselves. But that was not it wasn't as satisfactory as I as I thought it would be, and as I wanted it to be, which is fine. I think because they have done such a fantastic job of building multiple layers of complexity of like between Ruby and Christina and their relationship, I think I wanted more of the end of that relationship. I do believe she cared about Ruby, like to whatever extent that Christina is capable of caring about people. But I think at the end of the day, she's always going to care about herself and her ultimate aims more than another person. And so if it came down to her getting what she needed, like in order to meet her goals, and Ruby being alive, like Ruby's gonna be dead. Like I'm not surprised that that's what would happen. But I do wish that we could have seen that sort of the moment at which whatever may have potentially could have happened between them romantically devolved into Ruby's murder. So
yeah, I unfortunately felt that this episode could have been 2 episodes, kind of. I feel like they needed more time to do all the things they were trying to do, because I felt like there were several moments that felt a little shortchanged. This being one of them. Another one to me felt like Gia's participation in the final scene, whenever she serves as the link between Christina's body and Tick's body, which, fine, that makes sense. But I feel like she demonstrated a kind of mastery of her tales, which she had not previously shown. And my understanding was that for the tails to come out, somebody had to be having an orgasm. Nobody was having an orgasm during this, like, you know, it wasn't that kind of ritual.
Hopefully.
It was not that kind of ritual this time. So I was, if we had had some time to see Gia exercising her power differently, it wouldn't have felt so kind of Deus Ex Machina, you know, kind of there at the end.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Gia in this episode, how her role in this episode specifically was written felt a little bit too easy for me, I suppose. Like the way we finally get her, you know, we last see her a couple episodes back. She's this huge question mark for the series. And then the way that kind of plot line is resolved and the way that like Gia gets incorporated into the, you know, the mechanism of the family as a way to kind of like understand the episode is a conversation that, you know, Tick has with her at this fancy schmancy Chicago hotel, whose name I've already forgotten.
Drake.
I was like, the what? It's just like, you know, was just the phrase like, you're part of my family now. We're a family. And it's not that I don't believe that Gia didn't want to have family. I obviously think she did. I think she obviously did. But it's just the way that, like, I don't know, it's just kind of like the particular writing of Gia's incorporation into the storyline of this last episode was particularly neat. A little Deus Ex Machina, especially towards the ritual scene, definitely. And I feel, I don't know, it like everything in the show has like 10 layers deep of different meanings and implications. And how Gia becomes incorporated into this is that's family, and that's all she's ever really wanted. And that feels, I don't want to say shallow, but like a little bit underdeveloped, I suppose. Underdeveloped is a word that I will hang my hat on.
Yeah, I totally see that. And agree, I think, with both of your points, both on pacing and on simplicity of resolution. And that I also feel like there were things that made sense to have happened, but they happened too quickly, and sometimes, and we didn't have to. There wasn't a conflict or struggle to get there in the way that you would expect. So I am okay with a lot of the complications of the concept of family, in the multiple registers in which it appears. I know we haven't quite talked about that yet. So I think the idea of at the very beginning of the episode when Tick's mom, Dorothy, is her name Dorothy? So when Dorothy is talking to Tick and mentions how, you know, both Montrose and George were like a part of her soul, and if she had just accepted that as opposed to fighting it, like I felt like the implication was like it would have been like a less painful conundrum for all three of them to just accept that that's what they were. And so like this idea of you know, complicating love and family is as the nuclear family or as a monogamous relationship. And I kind of felt like they did that, sort of that notion of like complicating how romance and love and partnership and family can look and behave and evolve, as sort of like setting up this question of like Gia, because at the end of the day, she's Tick's ex. Like, Tick has a current partner who is pregnant with his child, and there was at one point where you literally saw Gia and Letty working together. And I think I couldn't tell if it was the Book of Adam or a different book, like a reference book, but whatever. They were working together in front of a text. And even though I like the thought of Gia having a family for sure, I'm also like, that's a precarious situation, you know. It's like even seeing a scene wherein Letty and Gia had to talk it out amongst themselves, right? Like even without Tick, even the two of them, like as women, like like we can't ignore, right, what he was to you, what he is now to me. But if we have something bigger to deal with right now, which is potentially, you know, like doing this ritual, maybe trying to save his life or accepting his death, we need to talk. You know what I mean? It's like things like that, I think, would have made it feel a little more satisfying for me.
Yeah, and like I said, I think this was an issue of time more than anything. Like everything that happened, I feel like made sense and needed to happen, but the execution could have used a little more time. Like it could have used a little more build up.
Yeah, like one last thing, like one more example of a thing that I think really could have been fleshed out or have been in its own episode was like kind of like the ancestral space that
for sure
that Hannah developed, or like even Hannah's entire like, you know, life after she escapes from the Braithwaite house and like liberates herself from slavery. I think like there's so much there that like there's so many details and events that were recounted in this little ancestral space. Like, you know, Hannah kills herself because the pain of like going to sleep makes her transports her back to kind of to the burning down of the house. Her own mastery over magic and her ability to do the original binding spell. Hattie, Tick's other ancestor, how she figures into this like lineage of learning magic and mastering magic. That was like 10-15 minutes of a 60-minute episode. That could have been the fleshing out of that entire timeline. Could have been an entire episode or 45 minutes. But yeah, that was one of those instances that like I felt a little underdeveloped.
Yeah, I agree.
LaTara, what's your standout scene?
So I mean, like after like talking about like me wondering how Letty and Gia managed the we're gonna work on this together thing. Actually, that scene like right before they leave on their trip to Artem, where Tick like he has a moment where he is like I think he's putting his bag on his shoulder or something and looking out the windows of the garage, and then he turns around and you see him just like survey the room and just look at like these people who love him and who he loves, and they're all like working hard towards this like common goal. And like we kind of talked about like the tensions throughout the show of individual priorities versus like the group priority, and like how in working towards like these common goals sometimes they have to change or sacrifice like their own personal ones, or there was conflict between various members of the group. And so it was like that moment of Tick looking and being like, wow, like this is my family. Like these people love me and I love them. And we're genuinely like here as a support for each other. And of course, like knowing how the episode ends, like Tick is looking and like, I'm going to die. And this is like these are the people that I'm going to like spend the last moments of my life with, you know, before the ritual. And so like even like once the episode ended and looking back at that moment, I thought it was particularly touching, a little bit sad and wistful, but also kind of warm.
Yeah, I think it's also emblematic of like the way that this entire episode is like problematizing the notion of biological family or like heredity in a really interesting ways. Like the one that stood out the most to me was Letty's becoming able to use magic and like entering into the ancestral space. We saw that like episodes ago when she started dreaming about Hannah when she became pregnant, right? Baby George as Atticus's descendant, as a magic imbued person. I didn't want to say magic user. I started to say magic user, but I don't want to. As a person,
magic imbued sounds pretty good.
Genealogical predisposition to magic.
Okay, yes.
he re-renders Letty's body, like, and makes her a magic user, which was really fascinating to me. I thought,
yeah.
And she joins Atticus's family, like, so he's not only re-rendering her in terms of magic, but in terms of ancestry, which was fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's of course running through lines throughout the show. We've talked a little bit about like complicating notions of family as biological versus like literally the people you choose to live your life with every day. And like family as something that can be a burden, thinking about Letty and Ruby's discussion in the cemetery, versus a choice, or a sense of a source of strength. But also thinking about how blood and ancestry work in this show, and even if, to return to the biological, I think there were some really interesting things happening in this last this last episode, for sure. Definitely the thing about Baby George being her ticket into magic, is which I don't know if that's a terrible way to put it, but that's how I think of it. It's she's carrying him so she can come too. So that's super interesting. And I think we have to talk about Letty's binding, the final binding spell where she says that she bound all white people away from magic. Because I think that definitely is going to bring up some questions of genetics, biology.
Yes. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. When I first watched it, I mean, obviously white people need less power in the world. And that's just the tea. That's the whole idea of this show, and a lot of the political conversations going on out there. It's just white people have a lot of power in this world and they don't need magic too. But for me, this seemed to really undercut the idea of the way that the show has moved away from biology. I think and reinforces the notion of heredity that they've talked a lot about, with Atticus being able to use magic because he's Titus's descendant, and George again continuing that line. I mean, it really just raises the question of biological essentialism, which, if you're not familiar with the term for our listeners, this is just the idea that race is something in you, that your body is of a certain race, instead of the society around you recognizes and imposes race upon you.
I don't know if either of you will be willing to, because I feel like I do quite a lot in Black studies, but not as much in ethnic studies, or critical race theory more broadly. But for our listeners who might be really struggling to understand what the assertion that race is not biological, what that means, could either of you do a quick rundown in terms of different what sort of competing constructions of race we're kind of touching on when we talk about Letty's binding of white people away from magic?
Yeah, it's super complicated. There have been, and to which I will not do justice in any single podcast.
I'm sorry to put y'all to put y'all on the spot. I guess I feel like someone listening to this might be what do you mean? If I can look at someone and I can tell what race they are, then that's what it is. And I understand why that's not necessarily the case, but assuming we may have listeners who haven't quite coded it that way, I think it might be helpful to talk about race as biological versus socially constructed access to various cultural power as a result of how you are racialized externally, regardless of how you may identify yourself internally.
Yeah. There have been multiple studies, biological studies, that disprove race to be biological, that of which you can do a quick Google search, which is not to say that race isn't real, right? So I think a lot of the immediate counter argument, if race is not biological, then it's not real. Race is real, but it's socially constructed, and it's a interpretation of difference that has incredible sociological implications. Skin color, or other kind of like phenotypic expressions of genetic markers, which we associate with race and racialization. Those are genetic, obviously. Like those things are genetically determined. But that is not what race is. Race is kind of the psychological and cultural associations that we have attached to these kind of like phenotypic expressions of genetic markers. And so race is perpetually being, it's perpetually being redefined. Asianness, indigeneity, Blackness, these are all definitions, these are all terms that are constantly being wrestled with and constantly being cast and recast as we move throughout history, and new associations are kind of attached to these kind of like racial markers. And so the idea that race is hereditarily determined is a question of ongoing debate. And I would like point to readers to the work of Jennifer Morgan, who wrote this incredible essay that kind of outlines the kind of like early Atlantic moment in North America, specifically in Virginia, in which like racial definition was not necessarily as confirmed or as solid as we now know it in the 21st century, or even in the 20th century, even in the 19th century. But she kind of points to how the idea of race is that which is which you inherit from your mother, specifically for Blackness, is kind of tied to the anxieties about how you reproduce your enslaved laborers. And so this is when we have the advent of matrilineal determinations of the slave or free status of children. And so it's complicated because racialization is different for different racialized groups. Like racialization for Asianness is different than racialization for Blackness, or racialization for Latinx people, or racialization for Indigenous people. Even the term Indigenous is as a vexed term, because indigeneity for North America is very different than indigeneity for Australia. And so this is just another way to kind of think about how race is not biologically determined, if we know that racialization for different racialized groups go along different historical, sociological, psychological vectors.
And I would point out too, like, whiteness is also a racialized group. Like there is no whiteness like without other constructions of race. And even though these are all different, they're mutually constructive of each other. And the way that people think about indigeneity, whiteness, Blackness, Asianness, Latinidad, like those are all like in conversation with each other.
Yeah. And they all change and evolve over time and across place. And so thank you so much, Klara, for like going through that whole, like, I thought it was an excellent sort of I know you didn't think you would do it justice, but I thought you did I thought it was a great job. But like for our listeners who are like, what's up with like the unease with the idea of like banning white people from magic, it's not the removing like power from white people, but it's the literally how are you determining who is too white to have magic, or who is not white enough to be able to have access to it, and the way that echoes back to various ways of measuring both Blackness and I would argue like definitely other races in legal structures and social discourse, in the news, in imagery. And so our sort of questions around that is definitely linked to how are they planning basically to enforce this? What I think the question, I think Klara, you used this word, what is the metric by which whiteness is going to be determined? And I think if we're coming from like a scholarly perspective, lineage of looks is not enough, that's actually not the way by which race always is construed and measured. And so if you take someone looks white, therefore they are white, and if you take that and reject it, then what other ways are you using, right? Is it parentage? if it's not appearance, it's like you see like the messiness of that question, because now we don't entirely know where to go to measure whiteness. And I think that will be a pretty sticky place in terms of plot later in the show. But thank y'all for going down that rabbit hole with me.
No, it's a huge rabbit hole that might potentially be a dissertation topic.
It's a big one.
Yeah, and I think like, you know, how are we measuring whiteness? Conversely, that is asking how are we measuring blackness? So then, like, questions of like, I think this is just asking for questions of like, what is racial purity, which is a super horrible idea. And then, you know, and like gatekeeping like blackness or gatekeeping Asianness, which is an idea that I am viscerally against. Again, because I think it's racist, like it's like profoundly racist. And so I think the question is like, you know, what is the metric for whiteness? And then conversely, what is the metric for blackness? But more broadly, like, what does this show think race is? Is the show like where is the show locating races at? Blood has been a huge like motif, I suppose, for lack of a better word, for this episode. And so what does it mean for blood to be the signifier of race in this way?
And of power.
And of power.
Yep.
Well, I don't think we can possibly answer this question except by either season 2 or a rewatch. So
Absolutely.
One of those needs to happen. But okay, we should probably move on to our cross country awards. Which I think there's plenty today. But personally, I really latched on to Dee and her cyborg arm. I thought this was super cool because honestly, I got a little like nervous about their handling of disability when it showed her arm and she was like, I'm never going to draw again. Of course, like people who experience disability are totally like entitled to whatever reaction that they have to, you know, the loss of their arm or like their congenital, you know, condition that leaves them without something that other people may have or leaves them with something extra that other people may not have. But I thought it was really cool here to see, like you said, the crossover between like horror and sci-fi. And it really made me think of like a lot of cool work that's going on in post-human theory. I'm thinking especially of Donna Haraway, who wrote The Cyborg Manifesto, which is a really famous work of post-human feminism. And she's thinking of the disabled body as an augmented body, not a like debilitated body, which is really fascinating. She thinks, you know, your bionic arm makes you not less than human, but more than human, which I think was like a really cool thought to take into this scene of watching Dee. Like she's, I characterized her earlier as like the next generation, you know, as like the vanguard, I guess, the more radical, the more like, the one that not only inherited Hippolyta's, you know, fire and her bigness, you know, but will continue expanding it. So I really loved their treatment of her, you know, her grieving through her disability, but also her, like claiming it. She amputates that arm, you know, she doesn't hang on to her old self. She moves forward. And again, I hesitate to make generalizations for anybody who's like experiences a disabling event. But yeah, I thought for Dee, it became really empowering in the end, which was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a cool scene.
We already talked about that one. We can keep on moving. That was really good. I love Cyborg Dee.
She was cool. It's just cool, like character design. Like even though she's like, you know, like a live actress, but like thinking about like, you know, Dee's like role as a cartoonist or as an illustrator. Like all the work that goes into character design, so all the work that went into the character design of the bionic arm. If bionic is the right word, but of the new arm, and how it relates to like Dee's character design and her costuming. Like she's a kid who's wearing overalls, I think, in this episode, which is super cute. So I think it's and you know, I think it's a interesting way to kind of like like flesh out the character of Dee a little bit.
Flesh out.
Yeah. I was like hesitating, like, do I have to say this?
Oh my gosh. I just get this image of Dee with like her incredible robotic arm in like school.
Yes.
Like having to write an essay in English class or like eating lunch. You know what I mean? Like I love this. Like I like just the insertion of like something utterly surreal, like into everyday quotidian life, like, and like her just going to class and like having friends and like eating lunch with like, you know, her robotic arm and like her pet black shoggoth. Like I'm super down for this.
Agree. What about you guys? Cross country award?
My cross country award for this episode really could be the cross country award for the entire series. It's just kind of like music and blackness in music and the idea of like black music. Which I was like, yeah, American music is black music.
Tell them.
It just is. With complications of like, you know, Appalachian like country music as well, and kind of like the bleedings or the interactions between those two different traditions. But like Motown, like rap, like it's American
blues,
music is black.
Blues and jazz, exactly.
Blues, jazz, the quintessential American genres, R&B,
and even like the roots of rock and roll.
Which became the whitest genre ever, but
started.
But Rolling Stones were like, listen to Howlin' Wolf, like the entire like the fact that the Beatles existed because they were living in Liverpool, which was a port city, and so they were having access to all these importations of blues recordings by black artists.
Yep.
The only reason the Beatles exist is because Chuck Berry existed. So I think the way the show has interwoven different genres of music throughout the past 100 years of like American popular music, I think to be incredibly cool. With like Rihanna targeting, like in this one episode alone, I can't remember the kind of like the rap artist or the rap group that was playing when Letty and Tick were going down into the elevator again, but they have Billie Holiday in the same episode. They had like another blues musician playing, and so I think kind of like the way that the mechanism of music serves to kind of like force the questions of like what time is, and to trouble the conceptions of time, to be really smart, really fun, very aesthetically powerful as well, and something that remained consistently of high quality throughout the series.
I agree.
That was like a good like season wide, like
I agree.
Cross country one, Klara. That was awesome. My cross country award is hilariously also connected to music. So in Beyonce's song Black Parade, which is a fabulous song, and of course it's Beyonce, so it's going to be fabulous.
Good.
It's so good. And so she has this line, right. She has this line where she says, "Ancestors on the wall, let the ghosts chit chat." And it made me think of like multiple other points more recently where I have sort of had like heard Black millennials talking online about how they sort of picture themselves in communication with their ancestors, picture their ancestors as a part of their everyday life. In particular, I'm thinking about, I don't know how many, if either of you or any of our listeners watch Refinery 29's YouTube channel, but they do this series where basically people typically of like the millennial age group, like mid 20s to mid 30s, shows Refinery 29 their home, and they'll like show the decor, pictures of their family that's up, blah blah blah. And there are two in particular I can think of. One was like a young Black woman living in LA. Another one was a young Black couple living in Brooklyn. And both of them made reference to the fact that they had pictures of their ancestors either on an altar or up on the wall as a way of like honoring them in like their day-to-day practice. And I've been thinking a lot about how I consider myself like as an individual, but also as like part of a lineage, going back to the idea of like family and bloodlines and genealogy and inheritance, like what did I get from, say, my grandmothers, for example, and sort of just complicating my idea of life as something that's over when you're dead, and thinking about how we conceive of our relationship with our ancestors, if we conceive of one at all, but seeing that echo in pop culture multiple times throughout this year, and then to have it echoed here in the ancestral, what do we call it? The ancestral home?
Ancestral space.
Ancestral space. There we go.
I don't know. We only did 10 minutes for it.
We weren't there long enough to give it a real name. But yeah, it's like the whole like Tick's ancestors coming back to be a support and resource to him and Letty, kind of had me reflecting on all of those moments where I've seen similar themes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, I can't believe it. We're at the end of our Lovecraft Country Bumpkin for the final episode of this season. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as we've enjoyed making this podcast. So, and I hope you'll show us that love with your likes, subscribe, leave some comments if you would like us to come back for season 2. If we get a season 2, we would love to know if you'd like to hear from us again. So please let us know in the comments.
Please.
With your stars. Anything you can do to show us some love would really help us. We're struggling graduate students. We just need the affirmation.
Please. All right. Thanks, y'all. And remember, it's never a good idea to ritualistically sacrifice your own cousin in creepy, crawly Lovecraft Country.